Next question from Carol Lee, who is an apprentice and who wants to ask a question about apprentices. So
Thanks,
Carol
Matt.
Lee.
Cheers. So my question is, the current minimum wage for an apprentice is £4.30 per hour. This works out at under £9,000 a year if an apprentice worked a 40-hour week. So my question for the panel is, do you think this salary is adequate to live on? And if not, what are your party going to do to try to raise this?
Thanks, Carolee. Yeah, so our apprentices get paid £4.30 per hour. What are you going to do about this, and what's your thoughts on this? I'd like to invite in the politicians if anyone'd like to raise their hand to go first. We have Cincinnati went first last time. I'll bring in Douglas Ross first on this question. Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks, Carly, for the question. First of all, I don't think it's enough. I'd love to see apprentices paid more for the work you do and the work you put in. But this is a key plank of our Scottish Conservative Manifesto, is to get more opportunities for young people to take up apprenticeships. First of all, we're not spending all of the UK apprenticeship levy on apprentices here in Scotland right now. I'd like to see the whole £247 million spent on apprenticeships, directly to apprenticeships. And I'd like to see a move away from the government setting targets and the government telling businesses, apply for apprenticeship in this area and do this, and say to businesses, what are the skills you're looking for? What are the skills that would benefit your business to take a young person in to then hopefully progress once they've completed their apprenticeship into, good, meaningful employment, either within that business or within that sector. And when I launched our Scottish Conservative pledge for apprenticeships, I met the Scottish Young Apprentice of the Year, Samir, at Thales in Glasgow, and the work he's done, particularly around COVID. He was an apprentice working with Thales, and he stopped doing what he was doing for the business and diverted his resources and what he was doing into the COVID response. And I think that's just one example of the flexibility and the ingenuity amongst our apprenticeships that I want to see rolled out far more across Scotland.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas. If I could push you a little bit on the £4.30, do you think that's enough to live on for an apprentice? And,
no.
And what precisely do you think could be done about this? Would you support raising the minimum wage for apprentices?
I'd like to see that going up, because it's not enough for people to live on. We want to make this an attractive thing for young people to choose. I think there's so many opportunities. So that's why I want to make sure there's more apprentice places in Scotland, but we've got to reward them for that.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Douglas. And I'll open up to our politicians again. I think everyone had their hand up. I'll come to Nicola Sturgeon next.
So, no, I don't think it is enough. Unfortunately, we don't control the level of the minimum wage in Scotland, so we don't have the powers to legally mandate a higher level. But £4.30 an hour is not enough for anybody to live on. So yes, it absolutely should be raised. The other problem I've got with the levels of minimum wage, and this applies to apprentices as well, is the age discrimination. You get paid more for the same job if you're older than you do if you're younger. If you're doing the same job, it shouldn't matter what age you are, you should get paid the same amount. So we should tackle both of those things, and it is one of the reasons I want to see these kind of powers lie in the hands of the Scottish Parliament, because, no disrespect to Douglas, I don't want to be waiting for the Tories to decide that they want to increase the minimum wage, because I think we might be waiting for quite some time for that to be resolved. We had a target of 30,000 New Start apprentices. We didn't hit that because of COVID. We want to work back towards that and then assess the need to go beyond that. But it's important that apprentices get paid a decent wage for what they do.
Thank you, Nicola. So I guess within the kind of powers of the Scottish Parliament, is there anything that we could do to improve essentially the financial support that apprentices receive? It's challenging if you're living on £4.30 an hour.
Totally. So yeah, I mean, we have somebody earlier on raised the importance of the way government awards contracts and spends money. We've got something called Fair Work First that says if you're getting government money, you have to adopt these fair work practices. Now, you could, I suppose, look at doing subsidy provisions. We've got to be careful there about the extent to which we're subsidising employers for what they should be doing. But we should look at anything that is practical. But the fundamental problem here is the legal level of the minimum wage, which should be increased.
Yeah, thank you. I'll invite in Anasawa.
Thanks, Matt. I think there's a combination of things. So So I would agree largely with what Nicola Sturgeon just said. So there shouldn't be an age discrimination in our minimum wage. It's completely unacceptable that we have an age discrimination. The £4.32 is completely and utterly unacceptable, and we would want to equalise the national living wage and have a presumption that our apprenticeship should earn at least the Scottish living wage, and we want to have 5,000 additional apprenticeships over the course of the next year as part of our national recovery plan to make sure we can challenge the unemployment crisis that's the risks coming as a result of COVID. But I think we can be more ambitious with the powers we've got. So yes, I would love us to devolve employment law to create a floor across the UK and have a race at the top in terms of pay in the nations and regions of the UK. But let's more robustly use the powers we have around the contracts we give to any individual to say you will only win those contracts if you meet these principles around levels of pay, levels of conditions. And I would go even further. If we want to recognise that climate change is going to be a huge challenge for us, you've also got to demonstrate what your carbon reduction plan is going to be in order for you to achieve those funds.
Thanks, Anas. I think I have Carol Ford next who'd like to come in.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say I actually agree with both Ross and Anas here on two different things. I agree that the apprenticeship levy should be going out. It should be spent in full on apprenticeships. And I also think that with the powers that we've got, we can do more. We can top up awards, and we could do that. But the approach that Liberal Democrats take to this is that we ought to have a minimum income level. And that minimum income level should apply to apprentices, to students, to pensioners, to any group. Nobody should be in a particular group experiencing some kind of poverty if they just shouldn't be below a minimum income. Now, obviously, the notion of universal basic income is a popular notion at the moment, and we would certainly support that in principle. But if at the moment, we need a lot of research to work out how to apply that, but we should be looking at a minimum income, and you shouldn't fall below it, regardless of what particular group you fall into.
Thanks, Carol. I'll bring in Ross Greer, and I saw Nicola Sturgeon had your hand up as well, so I'll bring you back in. But yeah, Ross Greer.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, the Green Manifesto is very straightforward on this. Apprenticeships should pay at least the real living wage. $4.30 is just under half of what it takes to live not above the poverty line, but on it. So it's outrageous to be paying people less than half of what they would need to live a life out of the poverty threshold. Our manifesto goes further than that on apprenticeships. We need to be doing a lot more to expand access to them for disabled people. We need to break down a lot of the gender barriers that there are around quite a few sectors that apprenticeships are prominent in. But going back to this point about how we use the powers that we already have in Scotland, Nicola mentioned the government's Fair Work agenda, which is a perfectly positive aspiration, but I find it really frustrating, having for years tried to pursue the government on this. The Scottish government can't even say how many businesses they provide public money to pay the living wage. And I've asked repeatedly for it. We don't know. And the answer is there are a huge number of businesses across the country who get public money, taxpayers' money, and are not paying a living wage to their staff. There are businesses who don't recognise trade unions. Many of them use very exploitative practices like zero-hours contracts. These are powers we already have, whether it's public procurement or the government's direct funding for apprenticeships, setting basic standards around stuff like paying a decent living wage. It's already within our powers. We can and should be doing it now.
Thanks, Ross. And I think with that, I'll perhaps bring Nicola Sturgeon back in to respond briefly, if you're able to.
So I don't entirely disagree with that. We are strengthening the conditionality on Scottish Government grants and the procurement process, and through Fair Work First, we are making sure that is becoming a much more dominant part of what we do. That's not why I wanted to jump back in. I hope one of the issues we can have consensus on in the next Parliament is a minimum income guarantee. I think we're the first main party to put that in our manifesto last week, to assess minimum income standards, and then as far as we can, there will be limitations without full powers, but as far as we can, bring people up to those standards. So hopefully we'll get some consensus on that.